I'm Macy Storm, 26, and I put myself through college while working 3 jobs and graduating co-valedictorian. For years, I supported my family in every way I could, quietly, without expecting much back. But when they paid for my brother's tuition and told me I'd figure it out, I made a decision that changed everything. Have you ever been overlooked by the people you showed up for the most? Tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to choose yourself after being dismissed or disrespected, hit like and subscribe for more true stories about setting boundaries and taking back your power. What happened next might just surprise you. My name is Macy Storm. I'm 24 years old, and I graduated college 3 months ago. That sentence sounds simple, even boring, but behind it is a story that still makes people pause when they hear it all the way through. The kind of story where you smile politely through the unfairness for years, keep your head down, and then, just once, you get to look up and say, I didn't just survive. I beat you at your own game. My brother and I were raised in a middle-class neighborhood outside St. Louis. Tree-lined streets, cul-de-sacs full of kids on scooters, and front lawns that stayed green thanks to our dad's obsession with the sprinkler system. My mom was a part-time speech therapist at the elementary school nearby. My dad worked in commercial real estate. On the surface, we were one of those families people call solid. 2 kids, a dog, no drama. But inside the house, the balance was always off. Matthew was 3 years older than me and somehow never had to ask for anything twice. The latest Xbox on release day? Done. SAT tutor starting sophomore year? Already scheduled. Lacrosse camp in Maine for $3,000? Paid in full before he even packed. He was charming in a way that made adults lean in during conversation. I was the quiet one, the one with perfect attendance and color-coded homework folders. I got good grades, never missed curfew, helped with dishes, but in our house, effort wasn't the currency that mattered. I remember one Christmas morning in particular. I was 14. Matthew got a MacBook. I got a refurbished Kindle with someone else's login still on it. When I asked if there'd been a mistake, Mom just smiled and said, Matthew needs it for school. You're creative, you'll love reading. Looking back, it wasn't the gifts that hurt. It was how normal it had become. By high school, I stopped expecting equal treatment and started managing my own expectations like a second job. I babysat on weekends. During sophomore year, I started working at a bakery before school 3 days a week. I learned to stretch $50 across 2 weeks and make it look like I was just being responsible. Matthew coasted. His grades were fine, not great. But it didn't matter. Our parents always found a way to spin it. He's got natural leadership skills, Dad would say after Matthew got written up for skipping class. When he wrecked his first car at 17, brand new, off the lot, a graduation gift he hadn't yet earned, they bought him another one a few months later. It's important for him to have reliable transportation. I didn't get my license until 18 because no one had time to teach me. We were close when we were little. Matthew used to let me sneak into his room and watch him play video games. He taught me how to ride a bike and stood up for me when I cried on the first day of 2nd grade. But as we got older, something shifted. He got more comfortable playing the role our parents handed him, and I learned to keep a distance. We weren't hostile, just quietly growing into the roles we'd been assigned. College applications were the breaking point. I'd been preparing since freshman year, extracurriculars, AP classes, volunteer hours, the whole checklist. I applied to 6 schools, including 2 state schools and 4 private ones. My top choice was Glenmont University, a mid-sized private school with a strong political science program and excellent internships in D.C. I worked on my personal statement every night for weeks, rewrote it 3 times, and cried in my guidance counselor's office when she told me it was one of the strongest essays she'd read that year. Matthew, on the other hand, applied late to 3 colleges, missed a scholarship deadline, and still got accepted to Glenmont's business program. He forwarded the email to our family group chat with a single sentence, "Looks like I'm going to Glenmont." The congratulations from my parents were immediate. My mom booked a campus tour the same day. Dad called it a solid ROI for the Storm legacy. A week later, my acceptance letter came. I opened it at the kitchen table and sat there, staring at the words, unsure what reaction to expect. "That's great, sweetie," Mom said from the stove. "We're proud of you. Now we just have to figure out the finances," Dad added, not looking up from his phone. It wasn't until the following month, after Matthew had already put down his deposit and my FAFSA forms were submitted, that they finally sat me down. "We've been thinking long-term," Dad said. "And realistically, we can only cover one tuition fully." I waited. "We feel Matthew has more of a defined path," Mom chimed in. "You're smart, of course. But you're still figuring things out." The silence that followed felt colder than anything they could have said directly. I asked what that meant. They said Matthew had a more structured plan. They said they believed I'd be fine. That I was resilient. That word. Resilient. It sounds like a compliment, but when you grow up being called that, you realize it usually means you can survive without help, so we're going to stop trying. I nodded. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I asked if they could at least help with books or housing. My dad sighed and said, "We'll see what we can do, but you should start looking at loan options." That night, I emailed Glenmont's financial aid office and started applying for scholarships I had a less than 5% chance of getting. I called the bakery and asked if I could pick up more hours over the summer. I looked into remote work gigs that would let me make money between classes. I mapped out a 4-year plan that accounted for tuition, housing, food, textbooks, and emergencies, because no one else was going to. Matthew didn't ask me how I was paying for school. At graduation, we both wore Glenmont sweatshirts under our gowns. Mom took 50 photos of him. I was in 3. Later that night, they took us out for dinner. Matthew's menu didn't have prices. Mine did. I started school on a Sunday. I moved into a dorm with mismatched furniture and a broken heater. My roommate never showed up, which turned out to be a blessing because I needed the extra space to stack the crates I used as a bookshelf and pantry. My parents helped Matthew move in a week earlier. They hired someone to assemble his IKEA desk and hung string lights over his headboard. They posted a photo on Facebook with the caption, "So proud of our boy starting the next chapter." No post for me. And still I showed up. To every class. Every shift. Every opportunity. I took notes like I was transcribing gospel. I joined the debate team. I applied for an unpaid internship and worked evenings at a grocery store to make it work. I drank coffee with powdered creamer and split dollar store ramen into 2 meals. I kept my head down, never complained, and at the end of my first year, I had a 3.98 GPA and a list of professors who told me I had promise. My parents called twice. I didn't remind them about my grades. I didn't ask for help. I learned to move like someone who didn't expect applause. Meanwhile, Matthew switched majors twice, failed a core class, and somehow still got a new laptop when his froze too often. Dad called it an investment. Mom mailed him a care package with protein bars and cologne. That was our rhythm. One of us was rewarded for stumbling. The other one was expected to sprint through broken glass without making a sound. But I was watching. I was remembering. Because I knew someday they'd all be watching me. And they wouldn't be able to look away. I kept my head down that first year. Worked 2 jobs, juggled classes, made friends where I could. I told myself it didn't matter if no one noticed. That being unseen was better than being underestimated. But even in the quiet, small cracks were forming. My parents never visited campus. Not once. Glenmont held a family weekend every semester, open lectures, student showcases, meet and greets with professors. Other students had parents flying in from across the country. I'd walk past groups laughing on the quad, moms with school sweatshirts tied around their shoulders, dads holding coffee cups like they were back in college themselves. My roommate Abby once asked if my family was coming for fall weekend. I told her they were too busy with work, which was partly true. But not the full truth. The full truth was they'd only asked if Matthew needed anything. He got a care package with snacks, new socks, even a note from Mom. "Proud of you. Stay focused. Love, Mom and Dad." I found out because he posted it on his story, tagging the return address like it was a badge of honor. I checked the mail that same day just in case. Nothing. When I came home for Thanksgiving break, it was like walking into a house that hadn't noticed I was gone. My bed was covered in laundry that didn't belong to me. Matthew's team photo was framed in the hallway, mine still in the envelope from graduation. At dinner, they asked Matthew about Glenmont. Met a guy in my econ class whose dad's on the board, he said, chewing with his mouth half open. He invited me to a mixer next week, said there'd be real job connections there. That's fantastic, Dad said, smiling. You're already networking. That's what it's about. I mentioned I'd just been promoted to night manager at the student cafe. 12 people applied for the position. I was the only freshman they even considered. That's nice, Mom said, cutting her turkey. But be careful not to let that distract you from your studies. They meant well, probably. But they didn't ask about my classes. Or my internship applications. Or whether I was eating. I told them about a policy paper I'd written that my professor had singled out in front of the class. That it might be submitted for a student journal. Dad nodded vaguely. Well, Matthew got invited to a student leadership retreat. All expenses paid. Matthew leaned back in his chair, looked at me, and smirked. You always make everything so heavy. You should relax more. He had started talking like them. The same condescending softness that sounded like advice, but cut like dismissal. You're too intense. You overthink everything. Not everything has to be a cause. It wasn't always hostile. Sometimes it came out as humor. He'd imitate my voice when I brought up anything remotely academic. Actually, according to comparative systems theory, he'd say, drawing out the syllables and rolling his eyes. Mom laughed once when he did it. I remember staring at my plate, counting backward from 10 just to stay calm. The rest of break, I kept to myself. Went to the library, helped out at my old job, got coffee with my high school friends. When I left to go back to school, no one offered to drive me. Matthew got dropped off personally. They helped him carry his bags in. That spring, he pledged a fraternity. My parents sent him a check to help cover dues. I texted my mom when I couldn't afford a biology lab manual. She replied 2 days later, sorry, sweetheart. We just had to help Matthew with something. Try asking the campus library if they have a copy you can borrow. They didn't. I borrowed money from my friend Mariah and spent the next 3 weeks skipping meals to pay her back. When I finally came home for summer, things had shifted even more. Matthew had grown into his role as the family's future. He talked like a budding executive, offering unsolicited advice at every turn. You're taking on too much, he said casually one night while we watched TV. If you keep stretching yourself thin, you're gonna burn out. You ever think about transferring to a state school? You'd save money and maybe chill out a little. I stared at him for a second, trying to decide if he actually believed he was helping me. I'm doing fine, I said evenly. Yeah, but is it worth it? He pressed. You're working crazy hours. Barely sleeping. Mom says you're always stressed. Mom says. That explained a lot. The next week, my aunt and uncle came over for dinner. I hadn't seen them in over a year. We were all catching up when my aunt turned to me and said, your mom told us you're thinking about taking a break from school. Is everything okay? I blinked. What? I never said that. She looked confused. Oh, I must have misunderstood. I just know you're working a lot. I looked at my mom. She just gave a small shrug and said, you've been so overwhelmed. We thought maybe you were reconsidering. They had rewritten my story. To them, I wasn't ambitious. I was overextended. Not resilient, just a liability waiting to happen. It was easier for them to see me as the one who needed scaling back than to confront the fact that they'd abandoned me to figure it out alone. That summer, Matthew got an internship at a boutique consulting firm downtown. My parents let him borrow the car for it, covered his lunches, even paid to have a few of his suits tailored. I worked full-time at a local law office doing data entry. I took the bus an hour each way and packed peanut butter sandwiches to save money. When my parents talked about the summer, they said Matthew was getting exposure. They said I was just working to save up, as if what I was doing didn't count. One afternoon, Matthew came home early. I was sitting at the kitchen table revising a research proposal for a fall fellowship application. He dropped a stack of resumes on the counter and said, Dad wants me to get these printed on nicer paper. Apparently regular paper looks cheap. I didn't say anything. He picked up one of my drafts and skimmed it. "Wow, this is dense," he said, handing it back. "Not sure anyone's gonna read past the first paragraph." I waited until he left the room to tear it in half and start over. That summer, I stopped trying to explain myself. I stopped bringing up accomplishments. I realized they only heard what they wanted to hear, and my job wasn't to convince them. I wasn't invisible. I was just inconvenient. The reliable one. The one who didn't need help. And they were counting on that to stay true. But I had already decided it wouldn't. It was the fall of my senior year when I got the email. I'd been accepted into the university's honors thesis program, only 20 students selected across all majors. My proposal on institutional bias in public policy had been approved with distinction. It wasn't just an academic win. It was one of those rare, tangible validations that said, yes, what you're doing matters. I sent a short message to the family group chat, attaching a photo of the acceptance letter and writing, "Just got into the Glenmont Honors Thesis Program, super excited. Can't wait to dig into the research." Seen. No replies. 2 days went by. Then 5. Not even a thumbs-up emoji from my dad. I wasn't expecting a parade. But a "proud of you" wouldn't have been hard. I waited, checking the chat like a fool. Eventually, I gave up and buried myself in work. I had 3 classes, a research assistant position, and my regular shifts at the cafe. I was busy enough that I didn't notice how quiet it had gotten. Until I opened Instagram. There they were. All 3 of them, my mom, my dad, and Matthew, posing in front of his fraternity house, beaming in matching Glenmont sweatshirts. Surprised our boy at his fall formal. Couldn't miss this special weekend. So proud of everything you're building, Matthew. The caption was written by my mom. Posted from her account with a heart and champagne emoji. I stared at the screen for a long time. The photo was taken a 15-minute walk from my apartment. They hadn't told me they were coming. Hadn't asked if I wanted to grab coffee or dinner. I lived right here. They came to town and didn't think I was worth a text. I called my mom. She didn't answer. A few hours later, she returned the call. "Hi, honey. Sorry, it's been a whirlwind this weekend. Did you need something?" "I saw your post," I said. "Oh, wasn't that fun?" Matthew had no idea we were flying in. His fraternity brothers were so welcoming. "It's just, he's really thriving here." "You were 15 minutes from me," I said quietly. "You didn't even tell me." There was a pause. Then she sighed. "Macy, this was his moment. We didn't want to make it about anything else." I didn't say anything. "You don't always have to be the center of attention," she added, in that soft, scolding tone she'd perfected. "Sometimes it's good to let others have the spotlight." That was the moment. Not when they skipped my email. Not even when they flew across the country without telling me. It was that sentence. You don't always have to be the center of attention. I hung up without saying goodbye. For most of my life, I had been careful not to take up too much space. I didn't complain. Didn't ask for more. I made sure not to overshadow Matthew. Not to embarrass them with ambition they hadn't asked for. And still, they thought I was selfish. For being hurt, they didn't acknowledge the most important opportunity of my academic career. That night, I sat at my desk and opened a blank document. I deleted the old file with my thesis outline and started over. Not the topic, I still believed in it, but the tone. The new draft was sharper. Less cautious. I stopped writing like someone waiting for permission. The days that followed were quiet. My parents flew home. Matthew sent a photo of a new blazer Dad had bought him for interviews. I didn't reply. I knew if I opened that conversation, I'd say something I couldn't take back. But inside, something had already shifted. A week later, I had my final check-in with Professor Mandel, the faculty advisor for the honors program. We reviewed my timeline, talked through sources, and outlined the next steps. As we were wrapping up, she paused. "Macy," she said, "you're leading one of the strongest thesis proposals I've seen this year. You know that, right?" I didn't answer. She continued. "I've worked with students from all kinds of backgrounds. Some come in with full support systems, others with none. You've built something remarkable, despite everything working against you." It caught me off guard. The way she said it, direct, without pity. Just a recognition. After the meeting, I walked across campus, past the library, the science building, the student union. Places I'd passed 100 times. But that day, it all looked different. I wasn't invisible. They just hadn't been looking. Thanksgiving break came. I didn't go home. I told my parents I had too much work, which was true, but also convenient. I needed space. They didn't argue. Matthew texted me a few days before, "Coming home for the holiday? Mom says she's doing the usual." "No. Staying on campus. Research stuff." "You always were the try-hard," he replied. Then a laughing emoji. I stared at the message and deleted the whole thread. I spent Thanksgiving alone in my apartment. A friend's mom dropped off leftovers. I made tea, cleaned out my email inbox, and finished coding a dataset I'd been struggling with. The loneliness was real. But so was the clarity. By December, I'd stopped waiting for them to notice. My resume had grown. I was accepted into a spring policy cohort that only took 10 students per year. I got offered a small research grant through the sociology department. One of my professors nominated me for a National Undergraduate Policy Award. I didn't tell my family about any of it. It became a game, how many things I could accomplish without them knowing. Each win was a quiet rebellion, a way of reclaiming power. Then one day in February, my dad called out of the blue. "Hey kiddo," he said, his voice overly cheerful. "Your mom and I were wondering about graduation plans." I kept my tone neutral. "It's in May. I'll send the details later. We want to be there. You know, celebrate both of you. Matthew's been talking about it too, says you've done well this year." It struck me then. The shift wasn't about pride. It was about optics. They were finally seeing the attention my work was starting to get. But it was too late. I was done performing for an audience that only clapped when it was convenient. The next few months flew by. Applications, presentations, interviews. My thesis defense was scheduled for early April. I stayed up until 2 a.m. most nights preparing. On the day of the defense, I wore a blazer I'd bought from a secondhand shop, fixed the collar 3 times before walking in. My panel included 2 professors, the department chair, and a visiting researcher. The questions were intense, but I held my ground. At the end, one of them smiled and said, "It's rare we see work this comprehensive at the undergraduate level." I nodded, thanked them, walked out, called no one. I wasn't waiting for applause anymore. I already knew who I was becoming. And soon, they would too. The night after my thesis defense, I came home and dropped my bag by the door. My roommate Jade was on the couch, eating cereal straight out of the box, half watching some baking show. She looked up when she saw my face. "How'd it go?" she asked. I sat down next to her, still holding my coat in my lap. "They passed me with distinction," I said quietly. Said it was one of the best projects they've seen this year. Her eyes lit up. "Macy, that's huge." I nodded, but didn't smile. "What's wrong?" I hesitated. Then I told her. About the silence. About the call from my dad, the way it felt rehearsed. About my mom's latest email asking what colors Matthew was thinking for his chords so she could coordinate her outfit. Not a single word about mine. "They don't deserve front row seats to your success," Jade said, voice steady. I looked at her. "Yeah, but they'll be there." Smiling like they did something. She poured the rest of her cereal milk into her mouth and said, "Then make sure what they see isn't theirs to take credit for." It stuck with me. The way she said it. Calm, matter of fact, like it wasn't even up for debate. I carried those words with me for weeks. I stopped checking the family group chat. I started thinking about graduation not as a shared milestone, but as a performance and not for them. For me. I pictured walking across that stage without their applause. I imagined the ceremony ending and heading off to my own celebration with people who actually knew what it took to get me there. I stopped waiting for the email that said, "We're proud of you." It wasn't coming, and I didn't need it. What I did need was funding. For law school. For rent. For everything else. So I doubled down. I applied to fellowships, scholarships, competitions, anything with an open application, and even a remote shot. I rewrote personal statements until 2 a.m., asked professors for letters of recommendation with 3-day notice, sent in videos of myself giving pitches for panels and awards. I didn't tell my parents any of it. I didn't want to give them the chance to downplay it. Or worse, to claim it after the fact. One of my professors pulled me aside after class and asked if I'd consider submitting my thesis to a national undergraduate research conference. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Another forwarded me an opportunity to present to a nonprofit board reviewing policy interns for the summer. I interviewed the same day I had a midterm and still landed it. It started to snowball. One thing led to another. More emails. More doors. And the thing was, I wasn't even trying to prove anything to them anymore. I just wanted to see how far I could get on my own terms. Around the same time, Matthew called. Twice. I didn't pick up either time. Then he texted, "Mom's planning a graduation dinner. She wants to know if you want the same color centerpiece as me or something different." I stared at the screen and closed it without answering. That week, Jade and I were sitting on the fire escape outside our apartment. She passed me a cup of tea and said, "What are you going to do for graduation?" I shrugged. Walk the stage. Smile. Clap politely for the speakers. That's not what I meant. I looked at her. She raised an eyebrow. You've spent 4 years building something while no one looked. Now they're finally paying attention. You don't owe them the version of this day they expect. She was right. I just didn't know yet what I was going to do. That night, I made a list. Not of accomplishments. Of names. The professor who wrote me 4 different letters of recommendation. The scholarship coordinator who walked me through the application process on her lunch break. The cafe manager who let me study behind the register between rushes. The teaching assistant who flagged my work for a department award. And Jade, who'd left dinner on the stove for me every night I got home after midnight. These were the people who deserved a front row seat. So I started planning something else. A small dinner. Off campus. After the ceremony. Just 15 people. The real ones. I booked the back room of a little restaurant near the edge of town. Quiet, warm lighting, long table under string lights. No speeches. No photos for Facebook. Just gratitude. Meanwhile, I sent in my final graduation paperwork. Picked up my gown and honors cords. The woman handing them out looked at my name and paused. "You're one of the speakers," she said. I blinked. "What?" She checked her list. "Yeah, for the School of Public Policy. You're giving the student address." No one had told me. I'd been nominated without knowing. I walked out of the building holding that black folder, still half in shock. Then I started laughing. Not because it was funny. Because it was finally clear. They couldn't silence what they refused to see. It didn't matter if my parents clapped when I walked across that stage. By then, the crowd would already know who I was. 2 weeks before the ceremony, I got an email from the university president's office. They wanted to feature a student success story on the school's homepage. Apparently, someone in the policy department had sent in my thesis and bio. They asked if I'd be open to an interview. I agreed. I didn't tell my family. Not out of spite, but because I didn't need to. This wasn't a warning shot. It was a statement. I'd made it here without their applause. Without their funding. Without their help. But they'd still be in the audience. And when they saw what the school saw, what the department saw, what the university itself saw, they'd realize the truth. They had missed every sign. Every chance to stand beside me. Now all they could do was sit down and watch. 2 weeks before graduation, the email came through. Subject, commencement update, co-valedictorian announcement. I stared at the screen in the library for a full 10 seconds before I opened it. Then I read the sentence 3 times, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as co-valedictorian for the class of 2025. Please keep this information confidential until official announcements are made at the ceremony. I didn't move. My hands were still on the keyboard, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, flashing through images of all-nighters at the cafe, textbooks stacked higher than my bed frame, budgeting apps and frozen dinners and jobs I wasn't qualified for but took anyway. Not to mention the nights I sat in silence while my brother talked about how exhausting Greek life was. I didn't tell anyone right away. I walked out of the library and stood in the quad, watching families taking early grad photos near the fountain, parents adjusting caps, siblings holding phones. It hit me then, my parents would be there. Matthew would be there. And none of them had any idea. I could have texted them, forwarded the email, given them a chance to prepare. But I didn't. Let them think we were walking the stage side by side. Let them show up with their usual assumptions. Let them find out like everyone else. Jade found out 3 days later when I left the draft of my speech open on the kitchen counter. She didn't ask why I hadn't told her sooner. She just grinned and said, "Guess they'll be sitting up straight for this one." A week before the ceremony, my mom texted asking if she should wear Matthew's fraternity colors to match the regalia. I told her to wear whatever she wanted. She replied with a photo of 2 proud parent of a Glenmont graduate t-shirts she'd had custom made, with Matthew's name printed beneath the phrase in blue script. Matching ones for her and Dad. Nothing with mine. I said nothing. The day before graduation, Matthew posted a photo of himself in his cap and gown outside the frat house. The caption said, "Couldn't have done it without the best support system in the world. Grateful every day for Mom and Dad." That night, I picked up my dress from the tailor, something simple, sharp. Not expensive, just well-fitted. I ironed my gown, double-checked the cords, and laid everything out carefully. Then I folded the speech draft and slid it into the folder I'd carry onto stage. The morning of graduation, Jade drove me to campus. She'd taken the day off work and borrowed her aunt's DSLR to take photos. As we pulled up near the event entrance, she turned to me and said, "I hope they brought tissues. They're gonna need 'em." I smiled but didn't answer. The student assembly area was buzzing, gowns rustling, shoes clicking against the tile, graduates hugging each other like they'd just survived a war. In a way, we had. I found my place near the front of the public policy line. Matthew was near the back with the business majors. I saw him high-fiving someone, laughing. The ceremony began exactly at 10. Faculty processed in. Families waved from the stands. The orchestra played something formal and predictable. I scanned the crowd briefly as we walked down the aisle. There they were, my mom, Dad, and Matthew's girlfriend, all in their matching shirts. Front row. Their faces lit up when they spotted Matthew. My mom blew him a kiss. They didn't notice me. We sat. Speeches started. A few faculty honorees, then a brief welcome from the university president. Then came the announcement I'd been waiting for. We are proud to present this year's co-valedictorians, students who exemplify the highest level of academic achievement and service to the university community. Please welcome, from the School of Public Policy, Macy Storm. There was a moment of silence, just half a beat longer than normal, as the name landed in the room. Then the applause started. Loud. Sustained. I stood slowly, turned, and stepped into the aisle. And as I made my way up to the podium, I glanced toward the front row. My parents' faces were frozen mid-smile. Confused. Then stunned. My mom's head tilted slightly, like she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. My dad blinked rapidly, then looked at Matthew, who was staring straight ahead, jaw tight. I looked right at them as I climbed the steps. And for the first time in 4 years, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. I opened my folder, unfolded the page, and began. For years ago, I arrived on this campus with a duffel bag, a planner full of anxiety, and a tuition bill I had no idea how I was going to cover. I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have family backing. But I had something else, certainty that I belonged here. I paused. Let the words settle. I worked 30 hours a week during my first semester. I studied during lunch breaks and rode the late bus home more times than I can count. There were nights I went to bed hungry and mornings I woke up to more bills than hours in the day. But I stayed. And I learned. I spoke about what Glenmont had taught me, not just academically, but personally. I spoke about policy and power and how some of the most overlooked people in any system often carry the heaviest load. And then I said this, to anyone who's ever been underestimated, written off, or made to feel like they had to earn their place twice over, let this moment be yours too. The crowd stood. Not all at once, but in waves. I couldn't look at my parents just yet. I wasn't finished. I closed the speech simply. No grand flourish. Just a thank you to my professors, my mentors, and the people who stood beside me when it mattered most. As I stepped down, I walked past the faculty rows first, then the first few audience sections. I finally let myself glance left. My mom's hands were clasped tightly in her lap. My dad was staring straight ahead, unmoving. Their t-shirts looked embarrassingly out of place now, cartoonish against the weight of the moment. Matthew wasn't smiling anymore. And that was enough. I returned to my seat and exhaled. The rest of the ceremony went by in a blur. Names called. Degrees conferred. Photos snapped. My name echoed one more time as I crossed the stage to collect my diploma. They didn't cheer. I didn't expect them to. But the applause didn't stop. Not from my department, not from my classmates, not from the professors who stood for me even when my family wouldn't. And later, when I stepped outside into the sunlight, Jade was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. She held out her arms and said, "Valedictorian looks good on you." Behind her, a group of professors approached. One of them handed me a sealed envelope, my invitation to a post-ceremony reception for faculty honorees and their families. I smiled and said, "I'll be there. But I'm bringing my own people." And I did. After the ceremony ended, the crowd spilled out onto the lawn in waves, parents holding flowers, friends hoisting phones overhead, professors in gowns shaking hands and posing for pictures. I lingered near the edge of the crowd, close enough to see them, but far enough not to be seen. I spotted Jade first, weaving through the clusters of people with 2 iced coffees and a folded paper fan that kept sticking to her palm. When she reached me, she handed me a cup and nodded toward the family section. "They're looking for you." I sipped my coffee. Let them. We stood there for a minute in silence, watching Matthew pose with a few fraternity brothers in front of the university seal. My parents hovered just off to the side, smiling, but smaller now. Shrinking, even. Their shirts had started to wrinkle in the heat. Eventually, they saw me. My mom waved, that tight, hopeful smile on her face. I waited a beat before walking over. Not slow. Not fast. Just enough time for them to prepare. My dad got there first. "Macy," he said, voice higher than usual. "Why didn't you tell us about the speech?" I looked at him. "I figured it wasn't your moment." He blinked. Didn't respond. My mom stepped forward next, arms half raised like she couldn't decide between a hug or applause. We're so proud of both of you," she said. Her voice had that performative brightness she used in front of company. But her eyes didn't meet mine. Matthew stood beside her. His gown unzipped, honor cords missing. He was holding his diploma in one hand, his phone in the other. I could see the outline of the Instagram app open behind his notifications. He didn't say anything. That was the thing that got me. For once, he didn't have a clever comment. No teasing. No shrugging it off like it didn't matter. He just stood there, staring at the grass. We took a few pictures. Not because I wanted to, but because I knew they needed at least one for social media. My mom stood between us, arms looped through ours like we were one big happy story. After the third click, I stepped back. "I have to get to the faculty reception," I said. My mom reached for her purse. "We can walk with you. It's for honorees and their guests." "I already have mine." I glanced back at Jade, who was pretending to scroll through her phone nearby. "Oh," my mom said. My dad cleared his throat. "Well, we'll see you at dinner then?" I paused. "No, I have plans." And then I walked away. That night, we celebrated at a small restaurant on the edge of town. The one with the string lights and long wooden tables. I had made the reservation weeks ago, before I knew about the speech, before I knew how the day would unfold. I'd just known I needed something that felt like mine. The guests were people who had mattered. Professors, classmates, coworkers, Jade and her girlfriend, who hugged me like we'd known each other for years. My academic advisor toasted to perseverance. My manager from the cafe brought me a cupcake with a candle in it and whispered, "For the things they never saw." I blew it out without making a wish. I didn't need to. I'd already made it. The next morning, I packed my things. No fanfare. No goodbyes. I was moving across the country for a fully funded graduate program, policy and economics, joint track, housing included. I'd secured it after 3 rounds of interviews and 2 essays I never showed anyone. They didn't help me pack. I didn't ask them to. Jade helped carry boxes down to the rideshare. She slipped a card into my bag when I wasn't looking. Later, on the plane, I opened it. Inside, it just said, "Build your own table. You don't need a seat at theirs." I kept that card pinned to the corkboard in my new apartment. Every time I glanced at it, I remembered why I'd started this in the first place. In grad school, everything moved faster. The classes were harder, the reading heavier. But something had shifted. I didn't just survive, I started to lead. Professors asked for my input in lectures. I was nominated for the Graduate Policy Journal editorial board by the end of the first month. I wrote late into the night and spoke up in every seminar. I pitched a research project about funding disparities in public education and was given a stipend to pursue it. I was finally being treated like someone worth investing in. Meanwhile, my family's group chat carried on. Photos of Matthew in New York. New job, entry-level finance. My mom posted a picture of him in a blazer standing in front of some office building. Our son, already conquering the city. No mention of the grad program. No questions about my research. I sent one photo the day I was published in a national journal, just a scan of the front page with my name in the byline. No response. I stopped sending updates after that. That summer, I got a voicemail from my dad. His voice was slower, quieter. "Hey, just wanted to say congratulations on everything. I know we didn't always show it, but your mom and we're proud. Anyway, call when you can." I didn't call back. Not because I was angry. I wasn't. Not anymore. But because I'd finally understood something. I didn't need their recognition. I never had. All those years, I thought the silence meant I had to be louder. Prove more. Work harder. But silence can also mean absence. And sometimes, absence clears space. Space to hear yourself. Space to choose who gets to speak into your life. And I was finally choosing. That fall, I gave a guest lecture at the undergraduate campus. The same university where I'd once worked 3 jobs just to stay enrolled. I stood at the front of a room full of students and talked about power and systems and how not being chosen isn't the same thing as being unworthy. Afterward, a young woman with frizzy hair and too many notebooks came up to me and said, "I'm the first in my family to go to college. I didn't think I belonged here until I read your piece in the journal." I shook her hand. "Belonging isn't something people give you," I said. "It's something you claim." She nodded, tearing up, and I saw a little bit of myself in her. The girl I used to be, waiting for applause that was never coming. But she wasn't waiting anymore. And neither was I. A year after I moved, my birthday landed on a Thursday. I hadn't told anyone, hadn't made plans. I had class until 5 and a late meeting after that. Jade texted me from across the country with a photo of the same cupcake she'd bought me at graduation. "Still proud of you," she wrote. That evening, when I got home, there was an envelope in my mailbox. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately, my mother's. I carried it inside and left it unopened on the kitchen counter while I made dinner. Pasta, Jared sauce, nothing special. I ate in silence, watching the window turn blue. After I washed the dishes, I finally picked up the envelope. Inside was a folded card with a watercolor painting of a bluebell on the front. Inside, a short message, "Happy birthday, Macy. I'm sorry for how we treated you. We were wrong. Love, Mom." Tucked inside was a check. $500. Blank memo line. I stood there holding it, unsure how I felt. It wasn't anger exactly. More like disorientation. This was the first direct acknowledgement I'd ever received. No qualifiers, no deflection. Just, we were wrong. But still, it didn't erase the years. The quiet birthdays. The ignored wins. The missed moments. It didn't undo what had already been done. I didn't cash the check. I didn't rip it up either. I slid it back into the envelope and tucked it into the drawer where I kept extra stamps and old receipts. Let it sit there unclaimed. Like the apology itself. 2 days later, I wrote her a note. "Thanks for the card. I'm doing well." That was it. Nothing else. No emotional labor. No invitation to unpack the past. Just acknowledgement. On my terms. She replied a week later with a short email about how the house was quieter now, how Dad was thinking of retiring early. I responded with a line or two and signed off with my usual, "Take care." And so it began. A cautious rhythm. We talk occasionally now, birthdays, holidays, a check-in here and there. The kind of relationship that doesn't lean too hard in either direction. There's space between us. And for the first time, that space belongs to me. She asks questions now. Real ones. About my research, my students, whether I'm seeing anyone. I answer when I want to. And sometimes I don't. My dad hasn't said much. He sent a short message after one of my op-eds went semi-viral, something like "saw your article." Must have taken a lot of work. I replied with "it did." Matthew and I are civil. We exchanged pleasantries at our cousin's wedding this summer after I started teaching. He complimented my shoes. I asked about his job. He was still working in finance, still living in New York, still posting motivational quotes on LinkedIn like they were gospel. We stood in the corner of the reception for about 5 minutes. Just long enough to remember what used to be there and what wasn't anymore. He didn't bring up graduation. Or the speech. Or the years in between. I didn't either. That's the thing about people who once believed they were ahead. When the dynamic flips, they rarely acknowledge the shift. They just pretend the playing field was always even. I don't resent him. Not really. He was handed the script. He read the lines. He didn't write them. But we'll never be close again. Too much had gone unsaid. And, honestly, I'd outgrown the need to bridge the gap. Most of my time now is spent in lecture halls and research labs. I mentor undergrads who remind me of who I used to be, eager, sharp, constantly second-guessing whether they're doing enough. I try to give them what I never got. Not just encouragement, but truth. That it's okay to be proud of yourself, even when no one else claps. That worth isn't measured in applause. That sometimes, being underestimated is the quietest advantage you'll ever have. Once, after a panel discussion, a young woman came up to me holding a copy of one of my published essays. She looked nervous, eyes flicking from the paper to my face. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "What if your family never really sees you?" I thought about it for a moment, then told her the only answer I had. "Then you build a life where that doesn't matter." She nodded slowly. I could tell she didn't fully believe it yet. But she would. Back at home, the check from my mom is still in the drawer. Sometimes I think about what it meant. Not the money. The attempt. It wasn't repair. Not really. But it was the start of something quieter, recognition maybe. Or the slow unraveling of denial. And while I didn't open the door all the way, I didn't slam it shut either. Just left it ajar. Enough to breathe. Enough to decide, day by day, who gets to walk back through it. I wake up most mornings before the sun's fully out. Coffee. Radio. A quick scan of the headlines. Then I head to campus. I teach 2 policy courses now, intro for undergrads, and a graduate seminar that always fills before registration closes. There's something quiet and powerful about standing in front of a room where no one knows who your parents are and no one cares. They just show up to learn from you. I have an office with a window now. Mid-sized, nothing fancy, but it gets good light. I keep a small photo on the desk. Not of family. Just a snapshot Jade took of me walking off the stage at graduation, right after the speech. You can't see my face clearly, it's turned slightly, hair catching the wind, but every time I look at it, I remember how that moment felt. I'm thriving. Not in the Instagram sense. Not some curated idea of success. But in the grounded way. The steady way. I sleep well. I'm debt-free. I have people in my life who check in just because they care, not because they want something. And I never had to sell my dignity to get here. My name shows up now on guest lecture rosters, on op-eds, on the occasional conference flyer. I'm not famous, but I'm respected. That used to feel impossible. Back then, I thought success meant proving them wrong. Proving that I belonged. That I was enough. Now I know better. Success isn't about proving anything. It's about building something, quietly, steadily, with your own hands. My parents still post. Anniversaries. Holidays. Proud of both our brilliant kids, the captions always say. Equal, as if the past never happened. As if it's always been this way. But people remember. the old neighbors, extended relatives, even Matthew's ex-girlfriend, who reached out to me once with a short message that just said, "They never really saw you, but I did. Congrats." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Revenge? I don't care about that anymore. What I needed was space. Distance. The freedom to stop performing for people who were never really watching. And now I have that. My relationship with my parents is cordial. Functional. They ask about work. I tell them just enough. We talk a few times a year, exchange holiday gifts, keep it light. They still haven't asked about the speech. Or the loans. Or the 4 years of silence that sat between every milestone. And honestly, I don't think they ever will. That used to hurt. But now I understand. It's not my job to rewrite their version of the past. It's not my job to make them see it. It's just my job to live free of it. Matthew and I haven't spoken in over a year. We liked each other's posts once, out of habit. Then stopped. He got a promotion. Moved to another city. Started dating someone new. I saw it in a photo once, him in a suit, arm around someone with a perfect smile, captioned "Built, not born." The irony made me laugh. There are still days when something catches me off guard. A photo from college. A campus memory. A voice in my head asking if it would have been easier if things had been fair. Sure, it would have been easier. But I wouldn't trade the version of myself I became. Because I built her. No shortcuts. No favors. No applause I didn't earn. And now I get to be that voice for other people. The students who sit in the back row unsure they belong. The interns who overthink every sentence in an email. The ones who didn't have someone telling them you can. I tell them. Every chance I get. Sometimes, a student will linger after class. They'll ask about career paths or research ideas or what to do when no one takes them seriously. I always say the same thing. Stop waiting to be seen. Build anyway. They usually nod like they understand. And maybe they don't. Not yet. But someday they will. Because here's what I know now, the spotlight doesn't come from people who ignored you. It comes from the work you kept doing when no one was clapping. It comes from the hours you spent building when no one was watching. It comes when you stop asking for their invitation and write your own. Sometimes, the real graduation isn't crossing a stage. It's the moment you stop chasing a family that only saw half of you. And choose, instead, to become whole on your own. Thanks for watching. Have you ever been the one who worked twice as hard for half the recognition? Did your family ever make you feel like you had to earn what they handed someone else for free? Drop your story in the comments. I read every one. And if you're learning to stand your ground and stop chasing people who never clapped for you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. More true stories coming soon.